Okay, testing, testing. This will take about 5 seconds to make sure this damn thing is recording. I hate technology, though I need it. Dear YouTubers, welcome to Real Turkey channel, where your loving, caring, tender presenter, Mr. Attila Yesilada, is experimenting with a new studio setup to improve the quality of our visual broadcasts. It's a fantastic tool. You can almost make a movie here and make me appear like Brad Pitt. But it's impossible for me to use. Just a small anecdote. I really don't know how to ride a bike, so that's the level of my manual skills. Never mind the technology. Okay, so much for BS. Let's get started. And this thing is on red, so it's recording. Yeah, this is a recorded broadcast, by the way. It's not a live forecast broadcast. So we want to make that sure as if it makes a difference. Today I'm going to talk about how the Erdogan government is destroying the private sector. Really, it is a shame. I have been in Turkey for 30 years now. And when I returned from the USA, having not finished my PhD, I got a job at a brokerage firm and have been observing and transacting with Turkish private sector. And it fascinated me what a vibrant culture it has. This is not to say it doesn't have its weaknesses like formality, the absence of a good contract law, and unscrupulous merchants and producers. But compared to former Soviet Union, Balkans, and the Middle East, our main competitors or our main markets, Turkey really has the entrepreneurial spirit, which is difficult to catch in any of those countries. And after the customs union agreement in 1995 or 1996 with EU, Turkey demonstrated its entrepreneurial spirit by rapidly increasing its exports and diversifying the goods and services it exports to EU. A lot of our industries, such as automotive, white and brown goods, this is the old expression, electronic goods, some simple investment goods, textiles, these are competitive across the world. And that we owe to the Turkish private sector. Now, also, I don't want to be unfairly critical to AKP government because up until 2012 or so, it was one of the most pro-business governments in the developing world. And it has done a lot of favors for the business community. Turkey has one of the most liberal foreign direct investment and financial investment laws. All of this began to change when Mr. Erdogan became president, and then a series of events caused the economy to lose momentum, such as the Gezi protests, then the temper tantrum, which stopped or reduced the flow of financial capital into Turkey, the 2016 coup attempt by Gülenist officers and their accomplices. All of these obviously took their toll on the economy. And as time passed, Mr. Erdogan's economic management has moved from an institutional setting and decision making by committee to simply imposing his personal will on the economy. Remember Ali Babacan, who is currently the chairman of the DEVA party, and thus Mr. Erdogan's competitor. And then afterwards, my old colleague, and I hope still a good friend, though I haven't seen him for years, Mr. Mehmet Şimşek, were capable economy ministers. And it now looks, with the benefit of hindsight, that they have stopped Erdogan from doing the most egregious damage to our private sector. And then Mr. Erdogan replaced Mr. Mehmet Şimşek with his son-in-law, Mr. Berat Albayrak, whom I supported for a long time because I think everyone deserves a chance in their new posts, whether they are related to the president or not. But unfortunately, Mr. Berat Albayrak has lost either his spirit or ran out of ideas, and essentially for the last year or so, the Erdogan Albayrak duo have been doing massive damage to the fabric of the private sector, to entrepreneurial spirit, and to the basic tenets of free market economy. It all started in the eve of Turkish local elections when Erdogan ordered state food sales stores to be opened, presumably to sell food on the cheap to buy votes. And then, this is really funny, but it really happened. Onion and potato warehouses were raided, and their owners, accused of stockpiling critical goods with an eye on charging exorbitant prices later on. Anyone who has an agricultural background would know. I'm really sorry. Let me shut this window because there are repairs again. As I was saying, everyone who has had ever tilled a field or harvested a crop would know tomatoes and potatoes are produced once a year and they are stored for the rest of the year. But it didn't matter. I mean, the whole idea was to lower food prices and to win local elections, and neither of those two happened. Turkey still, as of May, the annual increase in food prices in Turkey is 12.5%. And Mr. Erdogan and his associate, Mr. Bahçeli, have lost local elections. Many of the large cities in Turkey are now being administered by CHP and HDP mayors. But this was a very dangerous precedent, and for some reason Erdogan and advisors thought it must have worked, because from then on the interventions into the private sector increased and lost any objective or meaning. This is why I'm making this long convoluted sentence. Even though I consider myself a mainstream economist and an involuntary capitalist, I do know that markets don't solve every problem. Adam Smith even knew that markets don't solve every problem. And there are very legitimate reasons for the government to intervene in the affairs of the private sector, such as in the case of natural monopolies, or cartels, or price fixing agreements, or destructive competition. Anyone who has taken industrial organization in his college years would know the cases where it's legitimate for the government to intervene. Moreover, Turkey has several so-called independent supervisory bodies which oversee critical sectors such as, energy, capital markets, banking, even sales of tobacco and alcohol. And for instance, the decision by the government to temporarily monopolize the sales of surgical masks and disinfectant during the COVID epidemic is completely legitimate. There is no doubt about it that these are critical goods, the absence of which would hurt public health, and it is also legitimate to regulate their prices or to ban producers and retailers from charging any price they want. So, what I'm trying to say is when I prepared this video and decided to title it "The Brutal Murder of Turkish Private Sector," it's not because I am a unconditional, unbridled free marketeer. Laissez-faire doesn't usually work. On the other hand, from personal experience as well as from theory, it's obvious that excessive state interference never creates good results for the economy. It distorts the distribution of scarce resources. It kills the initiative of individuals and companies to do their best, which also creates the best result for the economy. And now let's look at how Mr. Erdogan is slowly choking Turkish private sector to death. I already mentioned state food stores, which a practice which has ended, but the practice of trying to regulate prices of all goods and services hasn't. In fact, a few weeks ago, the presidential office established an ad hoc committee called the Committee to Investigate Excessive Pricing or Price Gouging. Honestly, some things are very difficult to translate, which some of you American, if there are any American, viewers out there, they would know from Nixon years, price controls. And this committee essentially is now a legal body that decides whether the price of, I don't know, pretzels, cola, or underwear are fair or not. Call up any economist friend or WhatsApp her, and she will tell you that fair pricing is one of the most difficult things to determine in the theory and practice of the economy. Even today, we don't know most of the answers. This is why there are anti-competition or fair competition boards in most countries. In the United States, I think it's called the antitrust laws, though I don't think there's a regulatory body for it. But these are very thorny problems, and usually anti-competition or excessive pricing charges are made in very critical industries for which there is no competition. For instance, if there is only one internet provider, obviously the government could decide what prices can be charged for the benefit of the public. Or if there is only one utility serving a certain area, that utility is not allowed to charge any price it wants for water or electricity. These are all understood, but for Christ's sake, trying to regulate the prices of everyone is ridiculous. It's not workable. We know that because the Soviet Empire collapsed, among other things. Because of that reason, the price mechanism didn't work. And even in China, the prices of most goods and services are determined freely. So why do we have an excessive pricing investigation commission? Well, Mr. Erdogan wants to lower inflation so that the central bank can cut rates even lower. In my view, this board would apply pressure on the producers and sellers of any goods and services which are included in the inflation basket to keep prices artificially low. The problem with that? Well, in perfect and many imperfect markets, producers and retailers earn a fair return on their efforts and the capital they have invested. If you try to suppress that profit, many would leave the business. And as they leave the business, they would sack their employees. And of course, the economy would shrink. This is one example. Another one comes from the BRSA, Turkey's banking regulator, which almost weekly changes swap regulations and how banks' required reserves are calculated. It's called the asset ratio. and its nominator and denominator are so complicated. It's like the Black Scholes option pricing formula, and it changes every week. Uh, Charging banks differential required reserve rates or punishing them for holding a certain asset or liability is to a certain extent permissible. I have no doubt about it. I mean, you don't want your commercial banks, which are actually under public trust and their deposits guaranteed by a deposit insurance fund, to get into commodity speculation or hoard gold. But Turkey's asset ratio changes every week because Turkish private banks are very reluctant to extend credit. For one thing, they don't have enough deposits. People don't want to hold Turkish lira. Two, they understand that because of the epidemic, credit risk in the economy is unusually high. And in the absence of government guarantees or government underwriting of loans to private sector, in particular small companies, there is a very high likelihood that these loans will not be repaid and they will lose capital profitability and they will have to charge more uh, for other types of loans like customer loans. But none of this is acceptable argument for the Erdogan government. Erdogan's policy is to bring the economy back to normal, even though the virus is not completely eliminated in Turkey. And then, secondly, to boost production, regardless of the safety of workers, so that we can replace China and other Asian countries in European supply chain. Apparently, no one has told them that no European company would set up offices or production facilities or purchasing offices in Turkey if they're not allowed to make any profit. And, I'm laughing because this is so ridiculous. I mean, there are many leaders and countries that pursue myopic economic policies, which in the long run could be pernicious to the economy. But this is just a lack of basic economic knowledge that hurts the economy the day the measures are implemented. Another thing is we have an energy regulatory board. It has first threatened and then um, jawboned, arm twisted uh, gas sellers, gas distributors, oil stations, whatever you call them. Every country they have a different name. To lower their profit margins voluntarily. If anyone has visited Turkey for purposes of tourism or sightseeing of the archaeological sites, would testify that there are hundreds of abandoned gas stations along the roads, simply because the industry is overexpanded and it can't make enough profit. Now, reducing its profitability would lead to more abandoned gas stations and thousands of Anatolian youth being unemployed. Um, Another example, which is more broad and excessively destructive to the fabric of Turkish financial system, is um, to force Turkish savers to invest their savings into TL deposits, which currently yield 3 percentage points less than the inflation. In May, Turkey's CPI inflation on an annual basis reached 11.36%, something like that, whereas the average annualized deposit rate offered by banks was 8% pre-tax. So, you know, inflation 11.5, you get 8% and pay part of it as tax to the government. Essentially, you are making a gift to the bank with your purchasing power. Understandably, a lot of Turks started increasing their FX and gold deposits. So this time, as of yesterday, as of the Eid al-Fitr, the government has been regulating FX and other asset markets to make sure Turks don't make any money on their savings. For instance, every time you exchange currency, you have to pay a 1% tax. That's worse than Thomas Cook in London, which charges a spread of like 7%. I suppose they're bankrupt now. But that is every time I want to exchange $100 into Turkish lira, I pay a dollar to the government. And then when I need to do the opposite, I pay another dollar. You can't purchase more than 100 grams of gold in Turkey without a 24-hour waiting period. Why? Not because we're short of gold. Anyone who went to Grand Bazaar would know that we're chock full of gold. But apparently, during that 24 hours, the bank or the jeweler reports your purchase to the government, and the government investigates your background to make sure you are not, you know, you don't have illegitimate gains or you have paid taxes. But actually, the objective is to harass those who take their money out of deposits and buy spot gold because they don't trust the banking system anymore. These people will be intimidated. Yesterday, a major blow was dealt to Turkish mutual funds and retirement funds industry when Turkey's capital markets regulator, called Turkish Capital Markets Board, has narrowed has said that it shall no longer accept applications for funds which invest into external assets or FX assets, and those which are currently in business can invest into fewer groups of assets. If you look at all of these, you would see, purchasing gold means you can get into trouble with authorities. Uh, every time you purchase FX for the purposes of saving, you pay 1% tax. Now you can't even buy mutual funds, or their returns will be much lower because of the new regulation. You will see that Turkish depositors actually being whipped, shanghaied, railroaded into losing money in TL deposit in banks. You tell me whether that makes sense. But instead of dealing with inflation or incentivizing people to save, intimidation is the only way AKP knows how to deal with problems. As a result, and this is not my view, Reuters wrote an article about it, Turkey's private banks with foreign capital are looking for an opportunity to exit, while many small and medium-sized banks, we have roughly 70 commercial banks. We're in a franchise system, national banking system, not state banking system. Many of these banks are looking for buyers because they clearly told Reuters that enough is enough. We're tired of this game. This is not a free market anymore. Yeah, that's where we landed. It just evades the AKP mentality that the whole purpose of a free market economy is to make as much money as possible, legitimately, legally, and ethically speaking. That if you try to curtail the profit motif, you're also curtailing the propensity to work, the propensity to innovate, and the propensity to produce and sell. As a result, no matter what's done at the macro level, and nothing is done at the macro level, as long as these excruciating restrictions continue on the private sector, Turkish economy will never recover. You may wish to buy Turkish stocks and they are cheap, but whether they would make any profit is a different question. Okay, well, hopefully this thing recorded for about 25 minutes, and this is all I have to say about the brutal murder of Turkish private sector. I want to thank all of you for watching Real Turkey channel videos and putting up with me, Atilla Yeşilada, the presenter. And I would ask you to share these videos with anyone who is interested in Turkey or who does business with Turkey. I wish all of you a safe and healthy day. Stay home. Bye bye now.